The first thing I heard at my brother's engagement party was not congratulations. It was a sneer asking who had invited me. They laughed at my worn heels while standing inside a venue I owned down to the last chandelier. The cruelest part was seeing the bride wearing the family heirloom meant for me like a trophy. I did not come to fight. I came to watch. This engagement was not a romance. It was a setup. My name is Addison Bishop. The humidity of Briar Haven, South Carolina, usually clings to your skin like a desperate lover. But inside the Tide Glass Hotel, the air was conditioned to a crisp, expensive chill. I stepped through the revolving glass doors and felt the familiar hum of the building beneath my feet. It was a vibration most people would never notice. A subtle frequency of industrial HVAC systems and the rhythmic clatter of 500 guests moving across imported Italian marble. To anyone else, this was just a high-end venue. To me, it was a balance sheet, a renovation schedule, and a portfolio asset. But tonight, I was not the owner of Meridian Gate Holdings. Tonight, I was just the sister of the groom, and apparently, I was underdressed for the role. I paused at the entrance of the grand ballroom. My heels were practical, black pumps I had bought on sale 3 years ago, and my dress was a simple navy sheath that had seen better days. It was clean and it fit, which was all I required of it. Around me, the room was a sea of pastel silks and sharp tuxedos, crystal chandeliers, which I remembered approving during a budget meeting 2 years ago, dripped light onto the crowd. The floral arrangements were aggressive, towering structures of white hydrangeas and orchids that blocked sightlines and probably cost more than my first car. I spotted my brother, Grant Mercer, near the center of the room. He looked handsome in a way that made my chest ache, hopeful, eager, and terrifyingly naive. He was laughing at something his fiancée, Madison Klein, was saying. Madison was radiant, a vision in champagne satin, holding court with her bridesmaids. I took a breath and began the long walk toward them. It is a specific kind of torture to walk into a room where you know you do not belong, but it is a different game entirely when you own the room and no one knows it. As I neared the circle, the conversation dipped in volume. I saw Madison's eyes flick toward me. She leaned in close to her maid of honor, a woman with hair sprayed into an architectural marvel, and whispered something. She did not bother to cover her mouth. "The unemployed sister is here," Madison said. The words were soft, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, they landed with the precision of a sniper shot. The maid of honor giggled, a sharp, brittle sound that seemed to infect the group. The laughter spread like a virus. Subtle sideways glances and polite smirks masked behind champagne flutes. I kept my face neutral. I had practiced this expression for a decade. It was a mask of bland pleasantry, a shield that let insults slide off without finding purchase. "Addison," a voice said from my left. I turned to see my mother, Darlene Mercer. She was wearing a silver gown that was slightly too tight, her hair coiffed into a helmet of curls. She looked anxious. Her eyes immediately darted to my feet. "You wore those shoes," she said. It was not a question. "They are comfortable, Mom," I said. Darlene sighed, a long exhale of long-suffering disappointment. She reached out and smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on my shoulder, her fingers nervous and fluttery. "Just try to blend in. Okay, the Kleins are very important people. Harlan Klein knows everyone in the state. Do not make Grant look bad." "I am just here to wish him well," I said. "Good," she said, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "Just stay in the background, please." She drifted away, drawn toward the gravitational pull of the open bar. I stood alone, a stationary object in a swirling current of social climbers. I took a sip of water from a passing tray and let my eyes do what they naturally did. I stopped looking at the people and started looking at the operations. Habit took over. I scanned the fire exits. The north exit sign had a flicker. That would need a maintenance ticket. I looked at the VIP tables near the stage. The spacing was tight, barely 30 inches between chair backs, which was a violation of the service flow standards I had implemented last year. The servers were struggling to navigate the gap. I made a mental note to speak to the floor manager, then remembered I could not speak to anyone. My gaze shifted to the AV booth raised on a platform in the back. The technician was on his phone, not watching the levels. Typical. Then, I looked at the staff entrance near the kitchen. The double doors swung open, and Elliot Crane walked out. Elliot was the general manager of the Tide Glass. He was a man of impeccable detail, wearing a suit that cost $3,000 and an expression of perpetual control. He was scanning the room, checking the lighting. When his eyes landed on me, for a second, the professional mask slipped. His eyes widened. He stopped dead in his tracks, a waiter nearly colliding with his back. He looked from my scuffed heels to my face, panic rising in his expression. He took a step toward me, his mouth opening to say something like Ms., Bishop, or Madam Chairwoman. I locked eyes with him and gave a microscopic shake of my head. It was a command. Stop. Do not approach. Do not acknowledge. Elliot froze. He was smart. That was why I had promoted him. He swallowed hard, gave a barely perceptible nod, and turned sharply to reprimand a busboy. He understood the assignment. If the owner wanted to be invisible, the owner stayed invisible. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. It was safer this way. If they knew who I was, the dynamic would shift. They would put up their guards. They would perform. I needed them comfortable. I needed them arrogant. People who feel superior are careless. They talk too much. They leave their flanks exposed. I was here to watch. And the best vantage point is from the bottom of the social ladder. Addison, you made it. Grant's voice broke my concentration. He bounded over to me, grabbing me in a hug that lifted me off my heels. He smelled like expensive cologne and nervous sweat. Hey, kid, I said, patting his back. You look sharp. You have to meet them, Grant said. Pulling back, he was vibrating with energy. Harlan and Verity, they are amazing. Addie, really, they are going to help me get set up in the industry. I am sure they are, I said. He dragged me toward the head table where the Kleins were holding court. Madison was there, sipping a clear liquid from a crystal glass. As we approached, I saw it. My steps faltered. The noise of the party seemed to drop away, leaving only a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Pinned to the lapel of Madison's dress was a silver hummingbird brooch with a sapphire eye. It was unmistakable. It was vintage. Crafted in the 1950s. It belonged to my grandmother. She had worn it every Sunday. When I was 12, she had held my hand and told me, "When you are grown, this is yours, Addison, because you are the only one who knows how to fly against the wind." After she died, the brooch had vanished. Mom said it had been lost in the hospital shuffle. Yet here it was, gleaming under the chandeliers of my hotel, pinned to the chest of a woman who had just called me unemployed. It was not just jewelry, it was a message. It was a conquest. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, heavy and solid as a stone. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I did not look at the brooch. I looked at Madison's face. "Madison," I said, "you look lovely." "Addison," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She tilted her head, making sure the light caught the sapphire on her chest. "I am so glad you could scrape together the time to come. Grant talks about you occasionally." "He talks about you constantly," I lied. "Mom, Dad, this is Addison," Grant said, gesturing to the couple beside Madison. Harlan Klein stood up. He was a large man, taking up too much space. He wore a tuxedo that was a shade too blue, the fabric shimmering under the lights. His watch was the size of a hockey puck, encrusted with diamonds that looked suspiciously cloudy from this distance. "The sister," Harlan boomed. He extended a hand. His grip was moist and limp. "Heard you are in between opportunities right now. Tough economy." "Something like that," I said. "Well, do not worry," Harlan said, clapping a hand on Grant's shoulder. "We are taking good care of the boy here. Once he is officially family, we are going to open a lot of doors for him, big doors." Verity Klein sat next to him, fanning herself with a program. She was draped in layers of gold chains, looking like a display case in a pawn shop. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dress. "It is so brave of you to come," Verity said. "I mean, honestly, if I were in your position, I would be too embarrassed to show my face. But good for you, dear. Resilience is a virtue, I suppose." They were performing. It was theatrical. Excessive wealth, true wealth, the kind I dealt with in boardrooms in Zurich and New York, was quiet. It was cashmere and understated watches. This was loud. This was desperate. Harlan was sweating, his eyes darting around the room as if checking for an exit. Verity was touching her necklace every 5 seconds. A nervous tick. "We are just so happy to welcome Grant," Harlan said, his voice projecting for the benefit of the nearby tables. "We believe in family supporting family, financially, emotionally, totally." "That is very generous," I said. "It is just who we are," Madison chirped, linking her arm through Grant's. "Grant is going to be so secure with us. Unlike, well, some situations." She smiled at me. It was a smile full of teeth. I looked at Grant. He was beaming, soaking up the attention, completely oblivious to the sharks circling him in polyester blends. He thought he had won the lottery. He thought he had found a safety net. I looked back at the brooch on Madison's chest. The sapphire eye seemed to wink at me. I decided then I was not leaving. My mother wanted me to disappear. Madison wanted me humiliated. Harlan wanted an audience. I would give them what they wanted. I would be the ghost at the feast. I would fade into the beige wallpaper and watch every move they made. I checked my watch. It was 7:15 at night. The speeches were scheduled for 9. I had less than 2 hours. "It was nice to meet you," I said, stepping back. "I will let you get back to your guests." "Grab a plate, Ma, dear," Verity called out as I walked away. "The shrimp is expensive. Enjoy it while you can." I walked toward the edge of the room, finding a spot near a pillar where the shadows were deep. I leaned back against the cool wall and let the mask drop for a fraction of a second. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was ice cold. I am here for one night. Just one night. To find out why a man who sweats like a fugitive is marrying my brother. To find out how my grandmother's brooch ended up on a stranger's dress. To find out what they really want from a family that has nothing to give. I watched Harlan pull a phone from his pocket and rush toward the hallway. I watched Verity adjust her gold chains again. I watched Madison whisper to Grant, pulling him tighter, isolating him. Let them enjoy the appetizer. I would be ready for the main course, to understand why I stood in the shadows of my own hotel, watching my family fawn over a woman who treated me like hired help. You have to understand the geography of my childhood. We grew up in a small town called Oak Ridge Bend, a place where reputation was the only currency that mattered. In the economy of the Mercer household, my brother Grant was the gold standard, and I was the volatile penny stock that nobody knew how to trade. It was not that my parents were abusive in the way you see on the news. There were no beatings, no starvation. It was something quieter, more insidious. It was a slow drip of erasure. Grant was the sun. He was born smiling, a golden-haired boy who could break a vase and be praised for the velocity of his throw. When Grant got a C on a report card, my mother, Darlene, would blame the teacher for not understanding his creative spirit. When he made the junior varsity baseball team, she threw a barbecue that cost half our monthly grocery budget. I was different. I was dark-haired, serious, and cursed with a nature that demanded answers. I did not just accept things. When Darlene said we could not afford something, I asked to see the budget. When she told a white lie to a neighbor, I asked why the truth was not good enough. I was not trying to be difficult, but to them, my questions felt like an interrogation. I became the difficult one, the wet blanket, the problem. I learned very quickly that silence was the price of survival in that house. If I stayed quiet, I could avoid the sighs of disappointment. If I made myself small, I would not block the light shining on Grant. So, I began to observe. I watched how Darlene manipulated my father with guilt. I watched how Grant learned that a dazzling smile could get him out of doing chores. I cataloged human behavior the way other kids collected baseball cards. I left Oak Ridge Bend 3 days after my high school graduation. There was no party for me, no tearful goodbye at the driveway. Darlene was too busy ironing Grant's shirts for his first week of college, a college he would drop out of 2 semesters later. I packed a single duffel bag and caught a Greyhound bus, leaving a note that simply said I was going to find work. The next 16 years were a masterclass in grit. I did not stumble into wealth. I did not win a lottery. I clawed my way up from the sub-basement of the service industry. I started as a dishwasher in a greasy spoon diner, then a housekeeper in a roadside motel. While other staff members complained about the work, I studied the systems. I learned how inventory was managed, how margins were lost on wasted cleaning supplies, and how a smile from a front desk agent could diffuse a guest shouting about a double charge. I worked double shifts, saved every cent, and took night classes in finance and business law. I stopped seeing rooms as places to sleep and started seeing them as units of revenue. I realized that real estate was not about buildings. It was about debt leverage and asset management. When I bought my first distressed property, a crumbling 6-unit apartment complex, I did it under a limited liability company. I fixed the plumbing myself because I could not afford a contractor. I painted the walls at 2 a.m. when I sold it 2 years later for triple the price. I did not buy a sports car. I rolled every dime into the next deal, then the next. That was the birth of Meridian Gate Holdings. It grew from a single LLC into a portfolio of commercial real estate, logistics firms, and hospitality venues like the Tide Glass. I became addicted to the anonymity of it. In the boardroom, I was a shark. I was respected. I was feared. But to my family, I remained Addison the failure. I kept it that way on purpose. It sounds twisted. I know. Why not drive up in a Bentley and rub their noses in it? Because I knew Darlene Mercer. If she knew I was worth millions, she would rewrite history. Suddenly, my success would not be the result of my hard work. It would be Mercer genes. She would tell the neighbors that she always knew I was special. Worse, she would see my bank account as Grant's safety net. She would guilt me into funding his failed startups, his bad investments, his lifestyle. My hard-won empire would become just another resource for Grant to consume. So, I played the role they assigned me, the struggling sister, the one who could barely make rent. But here's the secret I carried in my chest like a lead weight. I never actually abandoned them. 5 years ago, Darlene called me crying. The bank was threatening to foreclose on the family home in Oak Ridge Bend. Grant had promised to pay the mortgage with money from a surefire investment that had collapsed. But Darlene did not blame him. She blamed the bank. She blamed the economy. She blamed bad luck. I listened to her sob, and despite everything, I could not let her lose the house. The next day, a clerical error at the bank resolved the issue. The mortgage was quietly purchased by a holding company called Blue Jay Equities, one of my subsidiaries, and the monthly payments were suspended indefinitely. Darlene believes to this day that the bank just worked it out, because she wrote them a stern letter. It did not stop there. When Grant needed surgery for a torn ACL, he got playing pickup basketball. His insurance denied the claim. 2 days later, an anonymous donor covered the $20,000 bill. When Darlene's car transmission died, she won a raffle she did not remember entering that covered the repair costs. I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars keeping a roof over their heads and keeping Grant out of bankruptcy. I did it through shell companies and anonymous trusts. I did it because, in some sick way, I loved them. Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I was the strong one. I was the pillar holding up the temple while they worshipped the boy who was cracking the foundation. But there was one wound that money could not cauterize. My grandmother, Nana Rose. She was the only person in my childhood who looked at me and saw me. Not just Grant's shadow. She was a stern woman, but she had soft hands. She used to wear a silver hummingbird brooch with a sapphire eye. It was not the most expensive piece of jewelry in the world, but it was unique. She told me the story 100 times. Her father had made it for her. When I was 16, 2 years before I left, Nana took me aside. She was already sick then, her skin like parchment paper. She opened her jewelry box and touched the wing of the hummingbird. "This is for you. Addison," she had whispered. "Grant gets the house. Grant gets the glory. But you get the bird, because you are the only one with wings. You are going to fly away from here, and you are going to soar." It was the only validation I had ever received. It was a promise. When she died a year later, I asked for the brooch. It was the only thing I wanted. Darlene had looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, Addison, I am so sorry. We cannot find it. I think the nurses at the hospice might have taken it, or maybe it got lost in the move. It is gone." I knew she was lying. I knew it in my gut, but I had no proof, and fighting about it would have made me look petty. "It is just a pin," Grant had said, shrugging. "Don't be so materialistic, Addie." I swallowed that pain. I buried it deep, along with the rest of my pride. I told myself it was just an object. I told myself that Nana's promise was in my heart, not in a piece of silver, but standing here tonight, in the ballroom of the Tide Glass Hotel. The lie unraveled. I watched Madison laugh, her hand fluttering up to touch her collarbone. The silver hummingbird caught the light. The sapphire eye stared right at me. It had not been lost. It had not been stolen by nurses. Darlene had kept it. She had hidden it away for a decade, hoarding it like a dragon, waiting for a woman she deemed worthy. And to Darlene, worthy meant someone who belonged to Grant. Giving that brooch to Madison was not a casual gift. It was a coronation. It was Darlene saying that this stranger, this woman who had been in Grant's life for 6 months, was more of a daughter to her than I had ever been. It was a declaration that Madison was the one who deserved to fly, simply because she had attached herself to the golden child. I felt a shifting inside me. For years, I had told myself that my family did not hate me. I told myself they were just oblivious, that they were victims of their own limited worldview. I thought if I just supported them from the shadows, if I just kept them safe, eventually they might see me. I was wrong. They did not hate me. Hate requires passion. Hate requires acknowledgement. What they felt for me was something far worse. They felt indifference. I was a utility to them. I was a background character. I was valuable only when I was invisible, and I was annoying the moment I asked for a seat at the table. But they had made a critical error. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken my distance for poverty. Grant was marrying a woman who wore my inheritance as a trophy. Darlene was beaming at them, thinking she had secured her son's future. I looked at the brooch again. It looked heavy on Madison's silk dress. It looked like it did not belong there. "You want to fly?" I whispered to no one. "I will show you what turbulence feels like." The sadness that had dogged me since I walked through the doors evaporated. It was replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a balance sheet. I was done being the anonymous donor. I was done being the scapegoat. I had spent 16 years building a fortress that they were currently drinking champagne in. They wanted to play games with legacy. They wanted to talk about value. I checked my watch. The time for sentiment was over. I was not here to catch a bouquet. I was here to audit the books, and the Mercer family account was officially overdrawn. I shifted my weight against the pillar, letting the cool plaster ground me. The emotional turbulence of seeing my grandmother's brooch had settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. That knot was familiar. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at a quarterly report and saw numbers that did not add up. In business, when the math looks wrong, it is rarely an accident. It is almost always a cover-up. I stopped looking at this event as a sister and started looking at it as an auditor. The room was a kaleidoscope of movement, but I focused my lens on the anomalies. The first red flag was the father of the bride, Harlan Klein. For a man who was allegedly celebrating the union of his daughter to a rising star, he was displaying all the classic symptoms of a man whose assets were about to be seized. He was seated at the head table, but he was not eating. His fingers drummed a frantic rhythm on the white tablecloth, rattling the silverware. Every 30 seconds, his hand would dip into his tuxedo jacket pocket, checking his phone. He would pull it out, shield the screen under the edge of the table, read something, and then shove it back with a scowl. A waiter approached him with a bottle of wine. Harlan waved him away with a sharp, aggressive gesture that was entirely out of place for a joyous occasion. Then, the phone vibrated again. Harlan shot up from his chair. He did not excuse himself to the table. He just turned and marched toward the side exit, the one that led to the service corridor near the kitchen. I waited 5 seconds, then pushed off the pillar. I moved along the perimeter of the room, keeping to the shadows. I knew the acoustics of that corridor. It was tiled with porcelain, which meant sound carried efficiently. I stopped just before the archway, pretending to adjust the strap of my shoe. Harlan's voice echoed off the tiles. It was low, but the urgency made it sharp. "I told you the timeline," he hissed. "Do not push me on the timeline. It happens tonight." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "I do not care about the clearing period," Harlan snapped. "We have the authorization. Just make sure the account is ready to receive. Once he signs, I want the transfer immediate. No holds." I stiffened. "Once he signs what, a marriage license?" That was standard. You did not need to shout at a banker at 8 in the evening about a marriage license, and you certainly did not talk about account transfers in the same breath. "It is a vendor payment," Harlan said, his voice dropping even lower. "It is categorized as event overhead. Just process it. I have to go." He hung up. I moved quickly, slipping behind a large arrangement of ferns before he stormed back into the ballroom. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that looked damp already. Vendor payment, event overhead, those were accounting terms. He was talking about moving money, and he was talking about doing it fast. I tracked him back to the table. He sat down and immediately downed a glass of water. Beside him, his wife, Verity Klein, was a study in nervous energy. If Harlan was the frantic dealmaker, Verity was the paranoid accomplice. She was not eating either. Her left hand was constantly in motion. She would touch her diamond earrings, then the heavy gold choker around her neck, then the stack of bracelets on her wrist. It was a repetitive, soothing cycle. Touch, check, confirm. I had seen this behavior before in casino surveillance footage. It was the body language of someone who is terrified of being caught. People who own their wealth wear it comfortably. They forget they have it on. Verity treated her jewelry like borrowed props that she was afraid of breaking before the curtain came down. She leaned toward Harlan, whispering something urgent. He patted her hand, but his eyes were looking over her shoulder, scanning the room. My gaze shifted to the center of the floor. Madison was introducing Grant to a group of men in gray suits. These were not family friends. They looked like investors. I drifted closer, picking up a discarded cocktail napkin to look like I was tidying up. I needed to hear the pitch. "Grant is incredibly versatile," Madison was saying, her hand resting possessively on my brother's bicep. "The merger of our families is really going to unlock some significant capital flow. We are looking at a restructuring of his portfolio post-wedding. Harlan has set up some wonderful opportunities." "Is that right?" one of the suits asked, looking at Grant with mild interest. "What sector?" "Asset management," Madison answered for him. "Grant is going to be the face of a new initiative my father is launching. We are calling it a legacy trust. Very exclusive." Grant nodded, his smile tight. "Yes, Harlan has been great. He says I have the right look for the brand." "The look," Madison corrected, squeezing his arm. "And the access. That is key." My stomach turned. She was not talking about a husband. She was talking about a frontman. Access. Access to what Grant was, a college dropout who worked as a fitness instructor. He had no assets, no capital, and no business experience. Unless they knew about the safety net. A chill went down my spine. Did they know about the anonymous payments? Did they know that every time Grant failed, money appeared? If Harlan Klein was a desperate man, and he certainly looked like one, he might have done a background check that went deeper than a credit score. If he had traced the support payments back to a source, he might think Grant had access to a silent fortune. They were not marrying him for his money. They were marrying him for my money, thinking it was his family trust. I needed physical evidence. Hearsay and body language were enough for a hunch, but not for a conviction. I scanned the room again. Near the entrance to the kitchen, I saw a young man in a black suit who stood out. He was too well dressed to be waitstaff, but too alert to be a guest. He held a thick manila envelope against his chest. He caught the eye of the wedding planner, a harried woman with a headset who was directing the flow of canapés. He nodded to her. She broke away from the servers and walked over to him. I moved parallel to them, using a chocolate fountain display as cover. The man handed the envelope to the planner. "From Mr. Klein," he said. "This is the vendor addendum. He needs it on the clipboard for the signing ceremony." "I thought we were just signing the commemorative certificate on stage," the planner asked, looking confused. "The legal paperwork is usually done privately." "Mr. Klein wants it all done at once," the man said smoothly. "Efficiency. Just slip this in the stack. Make sure it is the top sheet. Grant needs to initial the bottom of page 3 and sign the back." "Okay," she said, tucking the envelope under her arm. "I will handle it. Vendor addendum. You do not sign vendor addendums at a wedding. You sign those when you are modifying a contract with a supplier. Why would the groom need to sign a vendor addendum unless the groom was being designated as the vendor or the payer? If Grant signed that document, he would be legally acknowledging debt or authorizing payment or accepting liability for something Harlan was trying to offload. They were going to trick him into signing a financial death warrant in front of 200 witnesses, disguised as a ceremonial marriage license. I looked at Grant. He was standing near the stage now, laughing at a joke I was sure he did not understand. But the laugh was wrong. It was too loud. It was a bark of sound that cracked at the end. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. He was terrified. He knew something was off. I could see it in the way he kept checking his watch, the way he flinched when Harlan clapped him on the back. He was a rabbit in a trap, telling himself that the metal teeth clamping down on his leg were just a hug. I had to get closer. I had to see that document. But before I could take a step, a figure blocked my path. It was Madison. She had moved with the silent speed of a predator, up close. Her makeup was flawless, a porcelain mask that hid everything, but her eyes were hard, flat beads of obsidian. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my shoes with deliberate disgust. "You are hovering," she said. Her voice was low, pitched so only I could hear. It was not the sweet voice she used for Grant. It was cold and metallic. "I am just watching my brother," I said, keeping my face impassive. "He is busy," Madison said. "He has a future to build, a future that does not involve whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at my entire existence. "He is my family," I said. Madison took a step closer. She smelled of expensive orchids and something sharp, like acetone. "Let us be real. Addison, you are an anchor. You drag him down. Darlene told us everything. How you are always negative, how you mooch off them, how you are jealous of Grant's success." I almost laughed. The irony was so thick I could taste it. "Is that what she said?" "Grant is going to be a very important man after tonight," Madison said. "He needs to be surrounded by winners, people who can elevate him, not a sister who shows up in last season's clearance rack heels looking for a free meal." She leaned in, her lips brushing my ear. "You should leave, now, before the speeches. Do not ruin the mood. If you stay, you are just going to embarrass him. And if you embarrass him, you answer to me." She pulled back, flashing a brilliant fake smile for the benefit of a photographer passing by. "Think about it," she said cheerily, then turned and floated back toward the VIP table. I stood there, the blood humming in my ears. It was not just snobbery, it was a tactical strike. They were not just trying to insult me, they were trying to remove me. They needed the field clear. They needed Grant isolated, insecure, and desperate for their approval. If I was there, if I was watching, I was a variable they could not control. I was a witness. Madison's threat confirmed everything. They were terrified of anyone looking too closely at this wedding. They wanted to cut Grant off from his past, sever the lines of communication, and rewrite his reality until he believed that they were his only salvation. They did not just want to marry him, they wanted to consume him. I looked at the wedding planner, who was placing the thick envelope onto a podium near the stage. I looked at Harlan, who was wiping his hands on a napkin. I looked at Grant, who was scanning the room, his eyes skipping over the crowd, looking for something or someone to tell him it was okay. He was looking for me, and Madison had just ordered me to leave the building. I took a slow breath. The air in the ballroom felt thin. Charged with the electricity of a coming storm, I was not going anywhere. I reached into my purse and touched the cold metal of my phone. It was time to stop watching and start working. I needed to know exactly what was in that envelope, and I needed to know exactly who Harlan Klein owed money to. They wanted to play chess fine, but they forgot one thing. I owned the board. The air in the ballroom had become stifling, heavy with the scent of lilies and ambition. I had just turned away from the chocolate fountain, my mind racing with the implications of the vendor addendum, when a hand clamped onto my forearm. It was not a gentle touch. It was a vice grip masked by a French manicure. I looked down to see Madison Klein. Her smile was plastered on, but it did not reach her eyes. Those eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of the warmth she projected for the cameras. "We need to chat," she said, her voice bright and airy, loud enough for a passing waiter to think we were just two sisters-in-law sharing a moment. Just a quick girl talk. Before I could object, she steered me toward the double doors leading to the restrooms. She navigated us away from the main flow of traffic, past the velvet ropes, and into a quiet alcove near the service elevators. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar behind the heavy oak doors. Here, the lighting was dimmer, the silence amplified by the hum of the ventilation system. Madison released my arm and smoothed the front of her champagne satin dress. She took a moment to inspect her reflection in a decorative mirror on the wall, adjusting a stray lock of hair. I watched her, saying nothing. I knew the power of silence. It forces the other person to fill the void, and usually, they fill it with the truth they meant to hide. "You are really hard to predict, Addison," she said, turning to face me. She leaned back against the wall, crossing her arms. It was a casual pose, but her muscles were tense. "Most people would have left by now. Most people have a sense of when they are surplus to requirements." "I am here for Grant," I said calmly. "It is his engagement." Madison let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Grant? Right. You know, he worries about you. It is actually quite exhausting for him." "I was not aware I was a burden," I lied. "Oh, come on," Madison said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its public sweetness. "Let us cut the act. We know about the money you send home. Darlene told me everything. The little checks every month, the way you scrape together whatever you have left over from your whatever it is you do to help them with groceries or bills." She looked at me with a pity that was designed to be a weapon. "It must be incredibly stressful for you, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to play the hero with $50 here, $100 there. Honestly, Addison, it is pathetic." I kept my face perfectly still, though inside, a dark amusement was blooming. She thought my contributions were scraps. She thought the thousands of dollars that flowed into the Mercer accounts every month disguised as dividends, refunds, and lottery winnings were just little checks. She had no idea she was speaking to the person who effectively owned the mortgage on her future in-law's house. "I help where I can," I said, keeping my voice flat. "That is just it," Madison said, pushing off the wall and stepping into my personal space. "You think you are helping, but really, you are just buying access. You are buying their tolerance. You know they would not put up with your negativity if you did not guilt them with those handouts. You are purchasing a role in this family because you have nothing else to offer." It was a masterful piece of gaslighting. She took my generosity, the silent, thankless financial scaffolding that kept my parents from homelessness, and twisted it until I sounded like a manipulator. She was painting me as a desperate loner paying for affection. "Is that what you think?" I asked. "It is what I know," Madison replied. You love playing the victim. You love being the scapegoat. It gives you a reason to exist. If you were not the poor, mistreated sister, who would you be? You would be nobody, just a woman in cheap shoes crashing a party she cannot afford. She reached out and picked a piece of invisible lint off my shoulder. The gesture was invasive, a display of dominance. So, here is how it is going to work, she continued, her voice hardening. This is the end of the road. After tonight, you are done. I do not want you at the wedding. I do not want you at the holidays. Grant needs a fresh start. He is entering a new tax bracket, a new social circle. He does not need his past dragging him down like an anchor. I stared at her, processing the sheer audacity of her demand. She was not just asking me to leave the party. She was asking me to resign from my family. Grant is my brother, I said. He might have something to say about that. Grant will do what is best for his future, Madison snapped. And his future is with the Kleins. We are going to take care of him. We are going to take care of Darlene and your father, too. Real care, not the scraps you throw at them. And then, she said it, the sentence that handed me the key to the entire puzzle. Grant is the one with the potential, she said, her eyes gleaming with greed. Once we are married, his assets are going to be properly managed. Harlan will ensure the family estate is secure. After the wedding, his family will be safe. Harlan guarantees it. I froze. His assets, the family estate. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. My parents did not have an estate. They had a house in Oak Ridge Bend that would have been foreclosed on 5 years ago if I had not secretly bought the debt. They had a car that I paid to repair. They had zero savings. But Madison and Harlan did not know that. They saw the lifestyle. They saw that Darlene never seemed to run out of money despite having no income. They saw that the house was always safe despite the market crashes. And because Darlene was too proud to admit her daughter was saving her, and because I was too secretive to take credit, the Kleins had drawn the only logical conclusion their greedy minds could conceive. They thought the money came from Grant. They thought Grant was sitting on a trust fund or a secret inheritance. They thought he was the golden goose. They believed the golden child myth so completely that they assumed his charm was backed by capital. Madison was trying to exile me because she wanted sole access to a fortune that did not exist. She was trying to cut me off from a money supply that was actually coming from me. She was standing in front of the CEO of the company she was trying to rob, telling me I was too poor to be in the room. Safe? I asked, keeping my tone innocent. Why would they need Harlan to keep them safe? Madison blinked, realizing she might have said too much. She took a step back, recovering her composure. Financial security requires expertise. Addison, something you would not understand. Harlan is going to restructure everything. He guarantees that once the papers are signed, the Mercers will never have to worry about liquidity again. Restructure, that was code for draining accounts. Liquidity, that was code for cash extraction. I see, I said. Well, you seem to have it all figured out. We do, Madison said. She smirked, a look of triumphant pity. So do yourself a favor. Leave now. Go out the side door. Save yourself the embarrassment of the speeches. Grant does not need to see you looming in the corner like a bad omen. She waited for me to argue, to cry, to make a scene. That is what she wanted. She wanted me to explode so she could point a finger and say, "See? She is unstable." Instead, I gave her nothing. I relaxed my shoulders. I even offered a small, defeated nod. You have given me a lot to think about, Madison, I said quietly. She took my surrender at face value. Her posture loosened. She patted my arm again, patronizingly. It is for the best. You will see. Goodbye, Addison. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom doors, her hips swaying, confident that she had just disposed of the only obstacle in her path. She thought she had won. She thought she had cleared the board. I watched the doors swing shut behind her. The moment she was gone, the defeated sister act vanished. I pulled my phone from my clutch. My hands were steady, but my blood was boiling. They were walking into a trap of their own making. They were hunting a phantom fortune. But the mention of Harlan guaranteeing safety sent a chill through me. That sounded like protection money. That sounded like a threat. If they found out Grant was broke, what would happen men like Harlan Klein? Men who sweat through their tuxedos and talk about vendor addendums at weddings. Do not take disappointment well. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Grant. Addie, I am freaking out. They are acting weird. Harlan keeps asking for my social security number for the honeymoon bookings. And Mom is acting like she is drunk, but she has only had water. Should I run? I stared at the screen. My brother was naive. But his instincts were finally kicking in. He was sensing the predator in the room. I typed back quickly. Do not run. That makes you look guilty. Wait. Stay put. Do not sign anything until after the speeches. Trust me. I slipped the phone back into my bag. The picture was clear now. The Kleins were not just social climbers. They were financial predators running a con. They needed a legitimate front for something illegal, likely money laundering or debt layering, and they had identified Grant as the perfect mark. They thought he was a wealthy, pliable heir. They were setting up a marriage that was actually a corporate merger with a shell company. They wanted a legal cover, and Grant was the ticket, but they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed the unemployed sister was irrelevant. They had assumed the money came from the man in the suit. I walked over to the mirror Madison had used. I looked at my reflection. My dress was simple, my shoes were worn, but my eyes were sharp. You want the Mercer fortune. Madison, I whispered to the glass. Congratulations. You just met the chairman of the board. I turned away from the mirror and headed back toward the ballroom. I was not leaving. I was going to finish this. I had to time this perfectly. If I moved too soon, they would spin it. If I moved too late, Grant would sign his life away. I checked the time. 8:20 at night. The speeches were in 40 minutes. It was time to call in the cavalry. I did not return to the ballroom immediately. Instead, I walked further down the service corridor, past the restrooms and the linen closets, until I reached a heavy steel door marked Authorized Personnel Only. I swiped my keycard, a master pass that I kept hidden in the lining of my clutch, and slipped into the server room. The air inside was frigid, kept at a constant 64 degrees to protect the racks of blinking servers that powered the hotel's operations. The hum of the cooling fans was a white noise that drowned out the music from the party. This was my environment, out there, amidst the flowers and the lies. I was a clumsy extra. In here, surrounded by data and infrastructure, I was the architect. I took a breath, letting the cold air clear the scent of Madison's perfume from my nose. Then, I went to work. I pulled out my phone. My first call was to Elliot Crane. He picked up on the first ring, as I knew he would. Ms. Bishop, Elliot said. His voice was hushed. He was likely in his office or a stairwell. Elliot, listen carefully, I said. My voice had stripped off the hesitation of the sister role. I was speaking as the chairwoman of Meridian Gate Holdings. I am initiating a Level 4 internal audit on the event currently taking place in the Grand Ballroom. I need you to pull the complete vendor file for the Klein-Mercer wedding. I want every invoice, every contract, and every rider. Understood, Elliot said. I could hear the click of a keyboard in the background. What are we looking for? I need a background check on Harlan Klein, I said. And Elliot, I do not want rumors. I do not want what he told the catering manager. I want verified facts. Tax IDs, business licenses, credit standing. If he is claiming to be an asset manager, I want to know where his assets are. I can run a vendor verification through our compliance software, Elliot suggested. If he is listed as a payer on any of the contracts, we have his data. Do it, I ordered, and check the registered agents for any company he is associated with. I have a suspicion that the Klein Family Trust is a shell. Report back to me in 20 minutes. Yes, ma'am. I hung up and immediately dialed the next number, Nora Bexley, my general counsel. Nora was a shark in a silk blouse, a woman who viewed lawsuits as recreational sport. It was Friday night, but Nora never stopped working. Addison, she answered. her tone crisp. "Please tell me you are calling to tell me you bought another island, not that you have been arrested." "I am at the Tide Glass," I said. "I have a situation involving potential fraud, coercion, and identity theft targeting a family member. The perpetrators are currently on my property." "Is the family member asking for help?" Nora asked. That was the lawyer in her always establishing consent. "The family member is being manipulated," I said. "He is about to sign a document labeled as a vendor addendum that I suspect transfers liability or authorizes a fraudulent funds transfer. I intend to stop it." "Stop it how?" "Publicly," I said. "I want to blow the cover off this operation before the signature ink dries. I need you to assess the risk. If I expose personal financial data or contractual fraud on a microphone in front of 200 guests, what is my exposure?" There was a brief silence on the line. I could practically hear Nora's brain calculating the variables. "If you state facts that are documented, it is not defamation," Nora said slowly. "However, privacy laws are tricky. You cannot just read someone's bank statement to a crowd. You need to frame it as a corporate protection action. If Harlan Klein is attempting to use your hotel to facilitate a crime, you have the right to intervene to protect the business. Frame it as a compliance issue. Make it about the integrity of the Tide Glass, not about your brother." "So I need to prove he's defrauding the venue, not just the groom," I said. "Exactly," Nora said. "Link his actions to the hotel's operations. Did he falsify a credit application? Did he misrepresent the payer entity? If he lied to the hotel, you have cause to shut him down. If you just say, 'He is a bad man lying to my brother,' you are opening yourself up to a slander suit." "Understood," I said. "I will find the link." "Addison," Nora added, her voice softening slightly. "Be careful. People like this, when they are cornered, they do not sue. They lash out." "I am counting on it," I said. I ended the call and dialed Calvin Red. Calvin was the head of my forensic accounting unit. He was a man who saw the world in spreadsheets. "Calvin, I am sending you a name," I said without preamble. "Harlan Klein, and a company name likely something generic, maybe Klein Global or HK Management. I need you to trace the LLCs." "On it," Calvin said. "Timeline?" "Yesterday," I said. "I need to know if he has any active lawsuits. I need to know if he has filed for bankruptcy under a different name. And Calvin, this is crucial. I need a clean chain of evidence. Everything you find. I need it time-stamped and source-verified. If I have to hand this to a district attorney tomorrow, I want it bulletproof. No conjectures, just hard data." "I will put the team on it," Calvin said. "If he has moved money through any system we have access to, we will find it." "Check for a vendor addendum scam," I said. "It is a classic move. Over-invoicing a wedding or an event, getting the client to sign off on additional costs, but the payment creates a recurring authorization." "The old open-door fraud," Calvin muttered. "Nasty." "I will check the payment gateways associated with the event. Give me 30 minutes. I hung up. The digital net was cast. Now for the physical one. I texted Marcus Vale, my head of security. He was not on site, but he had access to the Tide Glass surveillance feed and could direct the on-site team. Target Harlan Klein and an associate, male, late 20s, carrying a large manila envelope. I need eyes on the side exits and the parking garage. Do not stop them. Do not engage. I just need to know if they try to run, if they move toward a vehicle. Get the plate number." Marcus replied instantly with a thumbs-up emoji. I put the phone away. My heart was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. The fear and hurt I had felt earlier were gone, replaced by the cold adrenaline of the deal. I checked my reflection in the darkened glass of a server rack. I fixed a loose strand of hair. I smoothed my dress. I had to go back out there. I had to play the part. If I stayed away too long, they would get suspicious. I needed them to think I was cowed. I needed them to think Madison's little pep talk had worked. I left the server room and walked back down the corridor. As I pushed open the doors to the ballroom, the noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. The band was playing a jazz cover of a pop song. Waiters were circulating with trays of filet mignon bites. I adopted a posture of defeat. I rounded my shoulders slightly. I kept my head down. I walked toward the back of the room, avoiding eye contact. I saw Madison across the room. She was holding court near the bar, laughing with her head thrown back. She spotted me, and a smug smile curled her lips. She gave a tiny nod to her mother. Verity. See, I handled her. I found a quiet table in the back corner and sat down. I did not have to wait long. There you are. My mother, Darlene, appeared beside me. She looked frazzled. Her silver dress was wrinkling at the waist, and she had a glass of white wine that was 3/4 empty. She pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. I have been looking everywhere for you, Darlene said. Madison told me you two had a talk. We did, I said, staring at the tablecloth. She said you were difficult, Darlene said, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. Addison, why do you have to be like this today of all days? I did not do anything. Mom, I said. She told me I should leave. Darlene sighed, the sound of a martyr who has carried a heavy cross for too long. Well, can you blame her? You come in here with that gloomy face, wearing those shoes you stick out. Addison, you make people uncomfortable. She reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. Look, Madison is upset. She feels like you are judging her. She says you were hovering. Just go over there and apologize. I looked up at her. Apologize for what? For ruining the mood. Darlene hissed. For being you. Just tell her you are sorry. Tell her she looks beautiful, and promise to smile for the rest of the night. Do it for Grant. Do it for me. If you make a scene, if you make Madison unhappy, Harlan might pull back, and Grant needs Harlan. We all need Harlan. We do not need him, I said. You do not understand, Darlene said, her eyes welling with tears that I knew were only half real. This is our chance, Addison. Finally, something is going right for this family. Grant is going to be set. I can finally stop worrying about bills. I can finally relax. Do not take this away from me. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had sold my grandmother's brooch. I looked at the woman who had let me pay her mortgage for 5 years while treating me like a failure. She was begging me to submit, to erase myself, so she could keep living in a fantasy world. In the past, I would have done it. I would have swallowed my pride. I would have walked over to Madison and let her gloat, just to keep the peace, but the peace was a lie, and the price was too high. No, I said. Darlene blinked, stunned. What? No, I repeated. My voice was not loud, but it was solid. I will not apologize. I have done nothing wrong, and I am not leaving. Darlene recoiled as if I had slapped her. You are being selfish. You are jealous of your brother. I am protecting him, I said. He does not need your protection. Darlene snapped. He needs his family to support him. You are just bitter because no one ever threw a party like this for you. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Fine, stay, sulk, but do not expect anyone to talk to you, and do not expect a seat at the head table. You have made your choice. She stormed away, heading straight for the open bar to refill her glass. I watched her go. It hurt. Yes, it always hurt. But the pain was distant now, like a bruise from yesterday. I looked at my watch. It was 7:55. 70 minutes. That was all the time I had left. I looked toward the stage. A technician was setting up a microphone stand. A projector screen was descending from the ceiling, displaying a monogram of Grant and Madison's initials intertwined in gold script. That was the kill zone. I could have pulled Grant aside. I could have dragged him into a back room and showed him the evidence I was about to receive. But he would not believe me. Darlene would scream that I was lying. Madison would spin it. Harlan would use his charisma to smooth it over. They would gaslight him until he signed that paper just to prove he trusted them. Private interventions only work when the victim is willing to listen. Grant was not willing. He was indoctrinated. To save him, I had to break the spell, and to break the spell, I had to destroy the illusion entirely. I had to turn the lights on. I needed the audience. I needed the witnesses. I needed the shame that only comes from public exposure. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Elliot. I have the file. You are going to want to see this. Harlan Klein is not an asset manager. He is a regional supervisor for a construction supply firm, a firm that is currently a subcontractor for Meridian Gate Holdings. I stared at the screen. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Harlan Klein worked for me. He was a middle manager in my own supply chain. He was pretending to be a tycoon while drawing a salary from one of my subsidiaries. The irony was perfection. The circle was closed. I typed back, "Bring the documentation to the AV booth. Do not let anyone see you." I looked up at the stage again. 70 minutes. They wanted a show. They wanted a memorable engagement. I was going to give them a performance they would never forget. I sat at the small, dimly lit table in the corner, the glow of my phone shielded by the tablecloth. To the casual observer, I was just a bored guest scrolling through social media. In reality, I was the command center of a corporate takedown. The first email from Elliot Crane hit my inbox with a silent vibration. I opened the attachment, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The file was a personnel dossier. It was not from a private investigator. It was from my own human resources department. Harlan Klein was not an independent asset manager. He was not a private equity shark. He was the Southeast Regional Manager for Apex Structural Supply. My breath hitched. Apex Structural Supply was a mid-tier construction vendor that had recently won a bid to supply steel reinforcement for 3 of my hotel expansion projects. They were a subcontractor for Meridian Gate Holdings. The man standing 20 feet away from me, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than his monthly car payment, was on my payroll. I almost laughed out loud. It was a dark, humorless laugh that stayed stuck in my throat. Harlan was not rich. He was a mid-level corporate employee who had likely maxed out his company credit card to rent this ballroom. He was playing the part of a tycoon using the very salary I paid him. But the email continued. Elliot had cross-referenced Harlan's employee ID with the vendor requests for the wedding. Addison. The note read, "Look at the invoices." I swiped to the next page. The wedding costs were astronomical, but not in a way that made sense. There was a charge of $45,000 for structural lighting support. There was a charge of $30,000 for custom acoustic dampening. These were not wedding expenses. These were construction line items. He was billing the wedding as a corporate event through his company's expense account, but he was padding the numbers. He was inflating the costs by 300%. Then came the message from Calvin Red, my forensic accountant. Subject: the LLC chain. We found the leak. The money isn't going to the hotel. The vendor addendum directs all overages and discretionary service fees to a third-party entity called HK Legacy Solutions, LLC. I ran the registered agent for HK Legacy. It is a shell, no employees, no physical office, just a mailbox in a strip mall in Nevada. But here is the kicker. Look at the authorization signature. I zoomed in on the PDF Calvin had attached. It was a scan of a preliminary contract, likely signed weeks ago. The signature at the bottom authorized the transfer of liability to the Mercer family representative. The signature read, Darlene Mercer. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The handwriting was shaky, hesitant, but it was unmistakably my mother's. I closed my eyes for a second, the pieces falling into place with a sickening click. Darlene did not have any money. Harlan knew that. So why have her sign? Because they needed a scapegoat. They had likely told Darlene that her signature was just a formality, a parental blessing, or a witness line to help Grant get a better deal. Darlene, desperate to be involved, desperate to feel important, would have signed anything they put in front of her. By signing that document, my mother had unknowingly designated herself and, by extension, Grant as the guarantor for the inflated costs. The plan was diabolical. Harlan would charge the wedding expenses to his company, Apex Structural. When the auditors at Apex eventually caught the fraud, which they would, because he was greedy and sloppy, Harlan would point to the vendor addendum. He would claim that the Mercer family had agreed to cover the costs. and that the money he funneled to his shell company was actually a reimbursement authorized by Darlene. He was setting them up to take the fall for his embezzlement. When the dust settled, Harlan would be gone with the cash in his Nevada shell company. Apex would sue Darlene and Grant for hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraud. My mother would lose her house. Grant would be bankrupt before his honeymoon was over, and because Darlene had signed it, she would look like the accomplice. "You bastards," I whispered. My phone buzzed again. It was Nora Bexley. "My lawyer, Addison. Do not let them leave. If they walk out of that building, the jurisdictional nightmare begins. We need to freeze them in place. Also, I just pulled the court records for Madison Klein." I switched to Nora's text. "Her name isn't Madison Klein. It is Madeline K. Holloway. She changed it legally 2 years ago. I found an employment tribunal record from a logistics firm in Ohio. I read the summary. Madeline Holloway had been terminated for data manipulation and unauthorized access to client accounts. She had worked in HR. She had been caught altering direct deposit information for temporary employees, diverting fractions of their paychecks into her own account. She was not a socialite. She was a grifter. She had been fired for exactly the kind of fraud they were pulling right now, just on a smaller scale. This wedding was her graduation project. I looked up from my phone. Madison or Madeline was standing near the cake, laughing with her head thrown back, her hand resting on Grant's chest. She looked so innocent, so loving. She was a predator who had found the perfect prey, a family that was too proud to ask questions and too desperate to be loved. My phone vibrated one more time. It was Marcus Vale, head of security. Target update. The male associate, the one with the envelope, just left the ballroom. He is currently at the valet stand. He is loading 2 large suitcases and a garment bag into the trunk of a rented sedan. The car is running. They were not staying. The honeymoon was not a trip to the Maldives. It was a getaway. I looked at the timeline in my head. They needed Grant to sign the vendor addendum on stage. That signature would be the final key. It would likely authorize the immediate transfer of gift funds or trust assets into the account Darlene had already validated. Or worse, it would sign over power of attorney under the guise of a marriage license. Once Grant signed, the transaction would trigger. Harlan would transfer the money from Apex to his shell company, using Grant's signature as the authorization. Then, they would cut the cake, get in the car, and vanish. By Monday morning, when the banks opened and the red flags went up, Grant would be married to a ghost, and Harlan would be $1 million richer. I looked at the clock, 8:35. The speeches were in 25 minutes. I looked at my mother, sitting alone at the table where she had banished herself. She was looking at Grant with such pride, tears shimmering in her eyes. She thought she had saved him. She thought she had done good. She had no idea she had signed his death warrant. A cold, precise fury settled over me. It was different from the anger I had felt before. This was not about insults. This was not about shoes or brooches. This was an attack on my blood. They had come into my house, my literal property, and tried to use my mother as a human shield for their crimes. They had underestimated the unemployed sister. They thought I was a spectator. They did not know that I was the one who wrote the checks that kept the lights on at Apex Structural Supply. I stood up. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I picked up my clutch. I was done investigating. The evidence was locked. The chain of custody was clean. The motive was established. I walked toward the AV booth at the back of the room. The technician, a young man named Dave, who I had hired 3 years ago, looked up as I approached. He recognized me immediately, not as the groom's sister, but as the woman who signed his paychecks. "Ms. Bishop," he said, scrambling to stand up. "I didn't know you were here." "Sit down, Dave," I said quietly. "We are going to make some changes to the program." "Changes?" he asked, looking nervous. "Mr. Klein gave me a strict playlist. The slideshow is set for 9 o'clock. "I know," I said, stepping into the booth and closing the door behind me. The tinted glass muffled the sounds of the party. I could see the entire room from here, the unsuspecting guests, my foolish brother, the predators circling him. "We are going to run the slideshow," I said, "but I have some new content to add." I plugged my phone into the console. The files from Elliot and Calvin appeared on the screen. "Mr. Klein wants to talk about legacy," I said, my finger hovering over the upload button. "He wants to talk about where the money comes from. I think that is a wonderful idea." I looked at Dave. "Connect my phone to the main projector. Override the audio feed. When Harlan starts speaking, I want control." Dave looked at the screen, then at me. He saw the company logos on the documents. He saw the word fraud highlighted in Calvin's notes. He swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am," he said. I looked out at the ballroom one last time. Madison was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Harlan was checking his watch. They were counting down the minutes to their victory. I was counting down the minutes to their execution. I stepped out of the audio-visual booth, and the heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing away the hum of the servers and the blue light of the monitors. The ballroom was louder now. The band had shifted to an upbeat tempo, something brassy and frantic that clashed with the cold calculation running through my mind. I scanned the room for Grant. He was not where I had left him. The crowd had shifted, moving like a tide toward the edges of the room as servers began clearing the center floor for the speeches. Then I felt a hand on my elbow. It was not the aggressive grip Madison had used earlier. It was desperate, clammy. I turned to see my brother. Grant looked pale, his skin possessing a sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the humidity and everything to do with fear. He pulled me toward a decorative alcove draped in heavy velvet curtains, away from the prying eyes of the guests. "Addie," he whispered. His voice was trembling. "You know something. Do not lie to me. I saw you watching them. I saw you go into the booth." For the first time in his life, my brother was not looking at me like I was his audience. He was not looking at me like I was a background extra in the movie of his life. He was looking at me like I was the only solid thing in a room made of smoke. "Grant," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You are scared." "Harlan keeps rushing me," Grant said, running a hand through his hair. "He said the paperwork needs to be signed before the toast because of some banking cutoff time in Switzerland. Who has a banking cutoff at 9 at night on a Friday, and he keeps asking if Mom signed the authorization. Addie, why would Mom need to authorize anything? I'm 30 years old." He was close. He was so close to seeing the bars of the cage. "Listen to me," I said, stepping into his space and locking eyes with him. "I need you to trust me. Do not sign anything, not a marriage license, not a vendor addendum, not a cocktail napkin, nothing." "Why?" he pleaded. Is it bad?" "I am checking them," I said. It was a half-truth, but it was all he could handle right now. If I told him his fiancée was a con artist named Madeline who had embezzled from a logistics firm, his brain would reject it. It was too big a lie to swallow in one bite. "There are red flags, Grant, financial ones." "Madison said you would do this," he said, his voice cracking. "She said you would try to get in my head." "I am not in your head," I said. "I am in your corner. Look at them. Grant, look at how they are sweating. Look at how they are guarding the doors." Before he could answer, a shadow fell over us. "Grant," the voice was high, pitched to a frequency of perfect distress. Madison stood at the entrance of the alcove. She was not the smug predator who had cornered me in the hallway anymore. She was a trembling, fragile flower. Her eyes were already wet with tears that seemed to appear on command. "What is going on?" she asked, her bottom lip quivering. "Why are you hiding in the corner with her? The photographer is waiting for the cake-cutting photos." Grant pulled away from me, guilt flashing across his face. "We were just talking. Maddie." "Talking?" Madison looked at me, and for a split second, the venom surfaced in her eyes before vanishing beneath a mask of hurt. "Is she telling you to leave me? Is that it? I knew it. I knew she couldn't handle seeing you happy." She let out a sob, a small, wounded sound that was loud enough to attract attention. Heads turned nearby. "No, Maddie, it is not like that," Grant stammered, stepping toward her. "She is jealous," Madison cried, her voice rising. She has always been jealous of you. Grant, Darlene told me she wants you to be miserable so you will stay stuck in that awful town with her. She is trying to poison you against us. Madison, stop, I said, my voice cold. Do not talk to her. My mother appeared from the crowd, moving with the speed of a guided missile. Darlene placed herself physically between me and Madison, wrapping an arm around the weeping bride. Addison, Darlene hissed. Her face was flushed with wine and indignation. What are you doing? I told you to behave. I told you to apologize. And here you are, making the bride cry 10 minutes before the speeches. Have you no shame? I am trying to stop him from making a mistake, I said. The only mistake is you being here, Darlene snapped. She turned to Grant, her expression softening into desperate pleading. Grant, honey, ignore her. You know how she is. She gets like this when she is not the center of attention. Madison loves you. Harlan loves you. They are doing everything for us. Mom, she says there are financial issues, Grant said, looking between us. Financial issues. Darlene laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Look around you, Grant. We are in the Tide Glass Hotel. Harlan paid for all of this. Your sister is just bitter because she is wearing shoes from a discount bin and Madison is wearing silk. It is envy. Pure, ugly envy. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Familiar and old. It was the specific pain of being erased by your own mother. She did not just prefer Grant. She actively rewrote reality to protect his fragile ego, even if it meant painting me as a villain. I looked at Madison. She was burying her face in Darlene's shoulder, shaking with fake sobs. But I saw her hand. She was clutching her lapel. I saw the silver hummingbird. Envy, I asked quietly. Is that what you think this is? I pointed a finger at the brooch on Madison's chest. Mom, look at that. Do you recognize it? Darlene froze. She looked down at the hummingbird. For a second, I saw the guilt flicker in her eyes. She knew exactly what it was. She knew she had lied to me about it being lost. It is just a pin, Addison, Darlene said, her voice tight. It is Nana's pin, I said. The one she left to me, the one you told me was stolen by the nurses at the hospice. Grant looked at the brooch, then at our mother. Mom, is that true? Darlene's face hardened. She doubled down. She had to. To admit the lie now would be to unravel the entire tapestry of her justification. It is a piece of old costume jewelry. Addison, my God, you are petty. Darlene spat. Madison liked it. It matched her dress. I gave it to her because she is becoming family. She is a daughter to me, a real daughter who appreciates what we do for her. The words landed like a physical slap. A real daughter. You gave my inheritance to a stranger, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. Not because she matters, but because she is buying you. You sold me out for a party. Mom? Stop it, Madison shrieked, pulling away from Darlene. She is ruining everything. Harlan is going to be so angry if he sees this. He will pull the funding. He will cancel the trust. She looked at Grant, terror in her eyes. Grant, if your sister does not leave right now, my father is going to walk, and he will take the future with him. Do something. Grant looked at me. He looked at the tears streaming down Madison's face. He looked at Darlene, who was glaring at me with pure hatred. The pressure was too much for him. He was weak. He had been trained to be weak. Addie, Grant said, his voice hollow, maybe you should go outside, just for a bit, until things calm down. I looked at him. I saw the apology in his eyes, but I also saw the cowardice. He was choosing the path of least resistance. He was choosing the lie because the truth was too hard to fight for. If I stayed here and argued, I would lose. Madison would scream louder. Darlene would create a scene. Security would be called not my security, but the hotel staff who did not know who I was yet, and I would be escorted out as the crazy sister. And then, 5 minutes later, A guilt-ridden Grant would sign that paper just to prove to Madison that he loved her. Emotional logic always wins in the dark. I needed to turn on the lights. "Okay," I said. I took a step back. "I will go." Madison stopped crying instantly. She sniffed, wiping her eyes with a delicate motion. "Thank you. Just stay out of sight until we leave." Darlene let out a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness." "Grant, fix your tie. You look a mess." I looked at my family one last time. My mother, the unwitting accomplice, my brother, the lamb being led to the slaughter, and Madison, the butcher holding the knife. "I am not leaving the hotel," I said, "but I will leave you alone." I turned and walked away. I did not look back. As I moved through the crowd, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from Marcus Vale. "Boss, we have a situation. 2 large men just took up positions at the east and west exits. They are not hotel security. They are private hires, wearing earpieces. They are blocking the doors. They are not letting anyone out." I stopped walking. They were locking us in. Harlan was not just afraid of Grant running. He was afraid of witnesses leaving. Or perhaps he wanted to make sure that once the signature was obtained, the happy couple could be escorted out without interference while the guests were held back. It was a hostile containment. This was not just fraud anymore. It was a kidnapping in plain sight. I felt a cold calm wash over me. I had given them a chance. I had tried to warn Grant quietly. I had tried to appeal to my mother's conscience. They had spat in my face. They wanted to control the room. They wanted to lock the doors. Fine. I would lock them in here with me. I typed a message to Elliot Crane. "Initiate Protocol 0. Override the main AV system. Lock out the local controls. I want the microphone live in 2 minutes." Elliot replied instantly. "Copy that. System is yours." I walked toward the side of the stage. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the speeches. A spotlight hit the center of the stage, where Harlan Klein was stepping up to the microphone, his smile wide and predatory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harlan boomed, his voice echoing through the expensive speakers I had paid for. "If everyone could take their seats, we have a very special announcement to make." Grant and Madison were standing at the foot of the stage. Madison was beaming, clutching Grant's arm. Darlene was clapping enthusiastically. I stepped into the shadows near the amplifier rack. Harlan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the vendor addendum. "Tonight is about family," Harlan said. "It is about trust, and it is about the future." I watched him. I watched the way his eyes darted to the exits, checking on his hired muscle. "Go ahead." "Harlan," I whispered. "Start the show." I gripped my phone. The app for the hotel's projection system was open on my screen. My thumb hovered over the play button. They thought they were writing the story. They thought I was the extra who had been written out of the script. They were about to find out that the extra was the director, and the director just called action. The glow of my phone screen was the only thing anchoring me to reality. Around me, the ballroom was a swirl of manic energy. The band was playing a frenetic jazz number. The guests were laughing with the kind of abandon that comes from an open bar, and the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. But in the palm of my hand, the world was breaking down into binary code, revealing the skeleton of the lie my family was living. I refreshed my inbox. It was 8:42 in the evening. The email from Calvin Red arrived with a silent notification. The subject line was simply, "The link." I opened the attachment. It was a flowchart, stark and brutal in its simplicity. Calvin had traced the corporate lineage of HK Legacy Solutions, the shell company Harlan Klein was using to invoice the wedding expenses. HK Legacy Solutions did not have an office. It had a mailbox at a shipping center in a strip mall in Nevada, but the registered agent listed on the filing was a man named Peter S. Vance. Calvin had run a cross-check. Peter S. Vance was also the registered agent for Apex Structural Supply, the company where Harlan was employed as a regional manager. The circle was closed. Harlan was awarding contracts to himself. He was using his position at Apex to approve the inflated invoices for the wedding. which were then being paid out to his own shell company. But he needed a fall guy. He needed someone to hold the bag when Apex eventually audited the books and realized they had paid for $50,000 worth of non-existent structural lighting. That was where the vendor addendum came in. I scrolled to the second attachment. It was a document Nora Bexley had pulled from a shared cloud drive that Madeline or Madison, as she called herself, had carelessly left open on a public wedding registry server. It was an internal email between Harlan and a lawyer who specialized in bankruptcy protection. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. The message read, "The groom is pliable. We will get the signature on the vendor addendum tonight after the speeches. Once he signs, transfer the liability to the Mercer account immediately. We need the funds in the offshore hold by Monday morning." My stomach turned over. The groom is pliable. They talked about my brother like he was a piece of soft clay they could mold into a scapegoat. They were not just stealing money. They were stealing his life. They were going to saddle him with hundreds of thousands of dollars in corporate debt, bankrupt him, and leave him to rot while they disappeared with the cash. But the worst revelation was yet to come. I opened the final file. It was a scanned PDF labeled Family Support Authorization. My breath caught in my throat. It was a document on Apex structural letterhead. It stated that the undersigned agreed to assume full financial responsibility for any overages related to the Tide Glass event, acknowledging that these costs were for personal family enhancement and not corporate business. At the bottom of the page, in shaky blue ink, was a signature I knew better than my own. Darlene Mercer. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My mother. She had signed it. I closed my eyes, picturing the moment. Harlan probably approached her with a smile, telling her it was just a formality. Maybe he told her it was a permission slip to let Grant have extra flowers. Maybe he told her it was to ensure Grant got credit for the party. And Darlene, desperate to be relevant, desperate to be the benevolent matriarch, had signed her name without reading a single line. She had authorized them to ruin us. The anger that flared in my chest was hot and white. It was not anger at Darlene's stupidity, I was used to that. It was anger at Harlan and Madison for weaponizing my mother's love against her. They had taken her desire to provide for her son and turned it into the weapon that would destroy him. I looked up. Darlene was standing near the cake table, holding a glass of champagne. She looked radiant. She looked proud. She had no idea that the piece of paper she had signed was a demolition order for her entire life. I checked the time. 8:48. I needed to secure the perimeter. Harlan had his hired muscle at the doors, blocking the exits to keep the witnesses inside. Two can play at that game. I texted Marcus Vale. "Marcus, listen to me. I do not want a confrontation at the doors. If we try to force them open, it will cause a panic. Instead, I want you to jam the flow. Go to the valet stand. Tell them the key retrieval system has crashed. Tell them a truck has broken down in the main driveway. I want a gridlock. No car leaves this property until I say so," Marcus replied instantly. "Consider it done. We will stack the cars 3 deep. Nobody is getting out of here fast." Good. If Harlan tried to run, he would find himself trapped in a sea of luxury sedans with nowhere to go. Next, I messaged Elliot Crane. "Elliot, I am ready. I need you to confirm that the Tide Glass projection system is linked to my device. I am uploading the file now." "Confirmed. Ms. Bishop," Elliot wrote back, "you have override authority. When you hit play, the house system cuts out. The screens, the audio, everything becomes yours." I spent the next 5 minutes building the narrative. I was not just going to show a document, I was going to tell a story. I arranged the slides on my phone with the precision of a prosecutor preparing a closing argument. Slide 1. The personnel file showing Harlan's real job. Slide 2. The fake invoices. Slide 3. The LLC registration matching the addresses. Slide 4. The email calling Grant pliable. Slide 5. The document with Darlene's signature. I looked at the sequence. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was undeniable. I looked toward the stage. The lights were beginning to dim further. The band played a final flourish and faded into silence. A hush fell over the room as the master of ceremonies, a man with a polished radio voice, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats," the MC said. "We are about to begin the toasts." Grant and Madison were standing at the foot of the stage, bathed in the spotlight. Madison was clutching Grant's arm so tightly her knuckles were white. She was whispering something to him, her face close to his. From this distance, it looked like affection. But I knew better. I stood up, I smoothed my dress, I walked out of the shadows and moved toward the edge of the dance floor, positioning myself where Grant could see me. I did not shout, I did not wave, I just stood there, a solitary figure in navy blue against a sea of pastels. Grant's eyes found me. He looked terrified. He looked like he was drowning and I was the only shoreline in sight. I locked eyes with him. I mouthed the words, slow and deliberate, "Wait, until 9. He blinked. I saw the conflict warring behind his eyes. He wanted to please Madison. He wanted to be the good fiancé, but the seed of doubt I had planted was growing. He looked at Harlan, who was pacing on the stage like a caged tiger. He looked at the thick envelope sitting on the podium. He looked back at me. Madison saw the exchange. Her head snapped toward me, and her eyes narrowed into slits. She stopped whispering and pulled Grant's face toward hers. I could not hear what she said, but I could read the body language. It was a threat. She gripped his lapels, her fingernails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. She hissed something that made Grant flinch. "If you embarrass me, you will regret it." That was the message. It was written in the set of her jaw, in the cruelty of her mouth. She was using his fear of public humiliation to bind him to her. She knew that Grant Mercer would rather die than make a scene. She was banking on his cowardice, but she had forgotten that cowardice has a breaking point. "Grant," Harlan boomed from the stage, his voice amplified and jovial, though his eyes were cold. "Come on up here. Son, we have some business to attend to before we raise a glass." The crowd applauded politely. Darlene beamed, clapping her hands together. Grant hesitated. He took one step toward the stairs, then stopped. He looked at his watch. 8:58. He was stalling. Madison shoved him, a subtle push disguised as a supportive touch. "Go," she mouthed. Grant stumbled forward, his legs heavy. He walked up the stairs like a man walking to the gallows. He reached the podium and stood next to Harlan. Harlan clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, pinning him in place. "Before we get to the champagne," Harlan said, grinning at the crowd, "we have a little tradition in the Klein family, a signing of the covenant, a promise to support one another, through thick and thin." He opened the envelope and pulled out the vendor addendum. He laid it flat on the podium and uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen. "Just a signature. Grant," Harlan said, his voice dropping so only the microphone picked up a low rumble. "Right here on the line. Then we are family." Grant picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. I looked at my phone. The time was 8:59 and 40 seconds. I looked at Elliot Crane, who was standing in the shadows of the AV booth balcony. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I looked at the screen on my phone. My thumb hovered over the override button. Grant lowered the pen to the paper. The tip touched the page. "Sign it, Grant," Darlene called out from the front row, her voice shrill with excitement. "Do it." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. I did not look at the crowd. I did not look at Madison. I looked only at the lie that was about to consume my family. I pressed the button. The connection was instantaneous. The soft, romantic background music cut out with a sharp electronic screech. The spotlight on the stage flickered and died, plunging the room into momentary darkness. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. "What is going on?" Harlan's voice boomed, but the microphone cut out halfway through the sentence. Then, the massive projection screen behind the stage roared to life. It did not show the monogrammed initials of the happy couple. It did not show the slideshow of childhood photos Harlan had prepared. It showed a stark, high-contrast document. Apex Structural Supply. Employee Dossier Harlan Klein. Regional Manager. The bright white light of the projector flooded the stage, illuminating Harlan and Grant like deer in headlights. I stepped forward. moving out of the darkness and into the aisle. I held my phone like a remote control, my eyes fixed on the stage. "Grant," I said. My voice was not amplified, but in the stunned silence of the room, it carried like a bell. Grant looked up, the pen freezing millimeters from the paper. He looked at the screen behind him. He read the words, "Regional Manager." He looked at Harlan. "I told you to wait until 9, I said, walking steadily toward the stage. "It is 9 o'clock, Madison screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of panic. "Cut it! Cut the feed! Someone turn it off!" She lunged toward the AV technician, but the booth was locked. I swiped my thumb across my phone screen. The image changed. Invoice 4402. Structural lighting support. Cost $45,000. Status unverified. The room erupted in murmurs. I swiped again. Email. Subject: Grant is pliable. Grant will sign tonight. Grant dropped the pen. It clattered against the wood of the podium, the sound echoing in the silence. He backed away from Harlan as if the man were radioactive. "What is this?" Grant whispered. Harlan's face had turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He looked at the screen, then at me. His eyes were wide with shock. He recognized the logo. He recognized the format. He realized, in that split second, that he was not looking at a hacker's prank. He was looking at his own employer's internal files. "Who are you?" Harlan roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Security, get this woman out of here." The two hired goons at the doors took a step forward, but they were confused. The crowd was in the way. I stopped at the foot of the stairs. I looked up at them. I looked at Madison, whose face was twisting into a mask of pure hatred. I looked at Darlene, who had covered her mouth with her hands. I raised my phone one last time. "I am not just the sister," I said, my voice calm, cold, and absolutely terrifying. "And you are not an asset manager. Harlan, you are a thief." I swiped to the final slide. Family support authorization. Signed, Darlene Mercer. "And you are trying to make my mother pay for your crime." The room went deathly silent. It was time to finish it. The microphone in Harlan Klein's hand screeched with feedback as he tried to speak over the gasps of the crowd. The projection screen behind him, which was supposed to be displaying a montage of romantic beach photos, was now glowing with the stark, unforgiving white of a forensic accounting report. "Technical difficulties," Harlan shouted, his voice cracking. He waved his arm frantically at the audiovisual booth, sweat glistening on his forehead like oil. "We have a glitch in the system. Pay no attention to the screen. It is a prank. Some jealous ex-boyfriend is hacking the feed." He turned to the crowd, forcing a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, this is about family. This is about honor. We are here to celebrate the future. Not look at spreadsheets, Grant. Sign the paper. Let us seal this bond and get the champagne flowing." He tried to thrust the pen back into Grant's hand, but my brother did not move. Grant stood frozen, his eyes locked on the screen behind Harlan's head. I swiped my thumb across my phone again. The slide changed. The room went deadly silent. Displayed on the 20-foot screen was a timeline labeled Project Wedding Cash Out. It was not vague. It was brutal in its specificity. Phase 1 vendor addendum, signature target, 8:45. Phase 2. Transfer of liability to Mercer family account. Phase 3. Immediate disbursement to HK, Legacy Solutions, LLC. Phase 4. Flight to Cayman Islands, departure. 6 in the morning, Saturday. And right next to the timeline was a copy of a flight manifest. 2 tickets, one for Harlan Klein, one for Madeline Holloway. There was no ticket for Grant Mercer. There was no ticket for Verity Klein. "You were leaving," Grant whispered. The microphone picked up his voice, amplifying the heartbreak until it filled every corner of the ballroom. "You were going to leave me here with the debt." "No," Madison screamed. She abandoned the crying act instantly, her face contorted into a snarl. "It is a lie. She made it up. She is using Photoshop Grant. Look at me. Do not look at the screen." But the audience was not looking at her. They were looking at the evidence. 200 guests. People who had been drinking champagne and eating canapes 5 minutes ago were now holding up their phones. I saw the flashes going off. I saw the screens glowing as people started live streaming. The social tension in the room snapped, replaced by the morbid curiosity of a public execution. "Turn it off!" Harlan bellowed, his composure shattering completely. He lunged for the power cord of the projector, but the unit was mounted high in the ceiling, far out of his reach. I took the stairs up to the stage. My heels clicked rhythmically on the wood. It was the only sound in the room besides Harlan's heavy breathing. I walked past Madison, who recoiled as if I were holding a knife. I walked past Grant, who looked at me with the wide, terrified eyes of a child waking up from a nightmare. I reached the podium. I reached out and took the microphone from Harlan's trembling hand. He was a large man, but in that moment, he offered no resistance. He was paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. I turned to face the room. "This is not a technical glitch," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cold as liquid nitrogen. "And this is not a prank." I looked down at Darlene in the front row. She was clutching her chest, her face gray. She was staring at the screen, at the signature that looked so much like hers, realizing exactly what she had done. For the last 4 hours, I have been treated like an intruder at my own brother's engagement. I continued. I was mocked for my shoes. I was told I was jealous. I was told I was poor. I was told to leave so I would not embarrass the family. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But I did not come here to fight for a seat at the table, and I certainly did not come here for revenge. I gestured to the screen, where the flowchart of the money laundering scheme was now displayed in high definition. I came here to stop a robbery, I said. A robbery that was wrapped in a wedding dress and signed with a mother's love. "She is crazy!" Madison shrieked, charging toward me. "Security, get her off the stage. She is ruining my wedding." She reached for me, her nails hooked into claws. But before she could make contact, a figure stepped out from the wings. It was Marcus Vale. He did not look like a hotel employee. He looked like what he was, a former military contractor who ran security for a billion-dollar conglomerate. He intercepted Madison with a single, fluid motion, blocking her path without even touching her. He just stood there, a wall of muscle and stone. "Step back. Ms. Holloway," Marcus said. His voice was low, but it carried. "Holloway?" Grant asked, looking up. "Who is Holloway?" "That is her real name," I said into the microphone. "Madeline Holloway, fired 2 years ago for payroll fraud in Ohio. She is not an heiress. Grant, she is a grifter." "Liar," Madison screamed, struggling against the air in front of Marcus. "I am a Klein. My father is a tycoon." "Your father," I said, turning to look at Harlan, "is a middle manager, and he is not very good at his job." Harlan's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. He looked at the side doors. The hired goons he had placed there were gone. In their place stood 2 uniformed police officers, arms crossed, watching the stage with professional interest. "You have no right," Harlan spat, though his voice was shaking. "You are nobody. You are just the unemployed sister. You have no authority here. This is a private event." "Is it?" I asked. I looked up at the AV booth balcony. "Elliot, if you please." The voice of Elliot Crane, the general manager of the Tide Glass Hotel, boomed over the public address system. It was the voice of absolute authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elliot said, "please remain composed. The hotel is currently under a security lockdown initiated by ownership." The crowd murmured, "Ownership." "The woman on stage," Elliot continued, his voice ringing clear and true, "is Ms. Addison Bishop. She is the majority shareholder of the Tide Glass Hotel. She is also the founder and chairwoman of Meridian Gate Holdings." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Then, the explosion. It started as a ripple of whispers and then erupted into a roar of shock. People stood up, Chairs scraped against the floor. "Meridian Gate," someone shouted from the back. "The investment firm. She owns the hotel," another voice gasped. I watched Darlene. Her mouth fell open. She looked from me to the hotel manager, then back to me. Her brain was trying to process the information, trying to reconcile the daughter she had pitied with the titan of industry standing on the stage. "Addison," Darlene whispered, "you own this?" "I own the building, Mom," I said. "I own the land, and I own the company that Harlan claims to work for." I turned back to Harlan. The color had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the podium for support. "Apex Structural Supply," I said. "That is your employer, correct? Harlan?" He did not answer. He could not. "Apex is a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Gate Holdings," I said. "I acquired it 6 months ago, which means, Harlan, that you do not work for a private equity firm. You work for me." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had spent the entire evening sneering at me. He had tried to steal from my family. He had tried to launder money through my hotel. And the whole time, he had been trying to rob the person who signed his paychecks. "No," Harlan wheezed. "That is impossible. You are broke. You drive a 10-year-old car." "I drive a practical car because I do not need to impress people like you," I said. At that moment, Nora Bexley walked onto the stage. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked like an executioner who billed by the hour. She walked straight up to Harlan and slapped a thick stack of papers onto the podium in front of him. "Mr. Klein?" Nora said, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "I am Nora Bexley, General Counsel for Meridian Gate. You are currently in violation of your employment contract, specifically the clauses regarding embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of company funds." She opened the folder. "We have tracked the invoices," Nora said. "We have the IP address from the computer where you created the shell company. It matches your work laptop. We have the vendor addendum you tried to force Mr. Mercer to sign. That constitutes attempted grand larceny and fraud." "I can explain," Harlan stammered. "It was just creative accounting. I was going to pay it back." "You were going to steal $200,000 from a family that you thought was helpless," I cut in. "You picked them because you thought they were desperate. You thought Darlene was foolish enough to sign anything for her son, and you were right about that." I looked at my mother. She flinched. "But you were wrong about one thing," I said, stepping closer to Harlan until I was inches from his sweating face. "You thought there was no one protecting them." "Addison, please," Madison wailed, dropping to her knees. She grabbed the hem of my dress. "Please, we can work this out. We are family. I love Grant. I really do." I looked down at her. "You do not love him. Madeline, you love the idea of a victim." I pulled my dress from her grip. "And tonight," I said, looking out at the sea of stunned faces, "you chose the wrong family to victimize, and you definitely chose the wrong venue." I pointed to the doors. "Officers," I said. "They are all yours." The 2 police officers stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming under the stage lights. Harlan slumped against the podium. Defeated. Madison was sobbing on the floor. Her masquerade dissolved into a puddle of mascara and tulle. I looked at Grant. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. Not as his sister, not as the scapegoat, but as a force of nature. "Addie," he whispered, "you own everything." "I do," I said softly, lowering the microphone. "And now, I am taking out the trash." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually only exists in deep space or moments before a thunderclap. The band had stopped playing. The waiters had stopped serving. 200 guests stood frozen, their eyes darting between the projection screen, the police officers, and the woman in the navy dress, who they had spent the evening ignoring. Nora Bexley broke the silence. She stepped up to the microphone I had lowered, her demeanor as crisp as the legal briefs she wrote. She did not shout. She did not need to. She simply spoke with the crushing weight of the law behind her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nora said, "the files you see on the screen have been packaged and delivered to the district attorney. We have also notified the fraud division of the state police and the internal compliance unit at Apex Structural Supply. This is now an active criminal investigation." She turned to the police officers and nodded at Harlan. "Officers, Mr. Klein is a flight risk. We have reason to believe he intended to leave the jurisdiction within the next 8 hours. We ask that you detain him for questioning regarding corporate embezzlement, identity theft, and attempted grand larceny." Harlan Klein did not fight. The bluster, the arrogance, the fake billionaire persona, it all evaporated. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a desperate middle manager who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. He held out his wrists, his head hanging low, as the officers clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut echoed through the ballroom. Marcus Vale and his security team moved in on Madison, or Madeline, as we now knew her. They did not drag her. They did not shout. They simply surrounded her. A wall of black suits that cut her off from the escape routes. "Ms. Holloway," Marcus said, his voice level, "we are going to escort you to a private room to wait for the authorities. Do not make a scene. You have lost that privilege." Madison looked around wildly. Her eyes landed on Grant. He was standing near the edge of the stage, his face pale, his hands trembling by his sides. "Grant!" she cried out. It was a desperate, clawing sound. She lunged toward him, breaking through the gap between two security guards. She grabbed his hand, clutching it with both of hers. "Grant, please, you have to help me. They are lying. I did it for us. I wanted us to have a start. I wanted us to be happy." Grant looked down at her hands gripping his. Then he looked at her face. For months, he had looked at her with adoration, seeing a savior, a partner, a ticket to a better life. Now, under the harsh glare of the projector lights, he saw the truth. He saw the calculation in her eyes. He saw the stranger behind the mask. He slowly pulled his hand away. It was not a violent motion. It was a recoil. "I do not know who you are," Grant said. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried like a shout. "I was marrying Madison Klein. She does not exist, and neither do you." "Grant!" she screamed, reaching for him again. "Get her out of here," Grant said. Turning his back on her, Marcus signaled his team. They took hold of her arms firmly. As they pulled her away, she struggled, her heels scraping against the polished floor. She was screaming about love, about money, about how unfair it was, and in the chaos of her struggle, something fell from her dress. It hit the wooden floor of the stage with a distinct metallic ping. It spun for a moment, catching the light, before coming to rest near my feet. The room watched as I knelt down. My hand was steady. I picked up the object. The silver felt cool against my skin. The sapphire eye of the hummingbird glinted up at me. It was my grandmother's brooch, the heirloom that represented freedom, the promise that I would fly against the wind. It had been stolen, lied about, and worn as a trophy by a fraud, but now it was back where it belonged. I pinned it to the lapel of my navy dress. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of justice. I stood up and looked at the front row. My mother, Darlene, was slumped in her chair. She looked 10 years older than she had an hour ago. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She had signed the paper. She had signed the family support authorization. She had been so eager to be the benevolent matriarch, so eager to buy her son's happiness, that she had nearly sold him into debt slavery. I walked down the stairs of the stage and stood in front of her. "Mom," I said. Darlene looked up. Her mascara was running. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of horror and shame. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Addison, I swear, Harlan said it was just for the flowers. He said it was to help Grant get credit. I thought I was helping." You always think you are helping, I said. But you never ask questions. You just want the glory of being the provider, and because of that vanity, you almost destroyed him. I was just trying to secure his future, Darlene cried, her voice rising in a jagged sob. I wanted him to be safe. I wanted him to have money, like we used to. I looked at her. I looked at Grant, who had walked down the stairs and was standing beside me. That is the problem, Mom, I said. We never had money. Dad was a mechanic. You were a receptionist. We were never rich. But we survived, Darlene insisted. We always had enough. Even when things got bad, money just appeared, luck was always on our side. I told Harlan that I told him the Mercer family is blessed. I told him we always land on our feet because someone up there likes us. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. That is why they picked us, I said, the realization washing over me. You bragged. You told Harlan about the miraculous way the mortgage got paid. You told him about the car repairs. You told him about Grant's medical bills vanishing. You painted a picture of a secret family fortune. I took a step closer to her. There was no luck. Mom, there was no blessing. There was just me. Darlene froze. What? The mortgage, I said. Blue Jay Equities. That is my company. I bought your debt 5 years ago. I have been paying it every month. I turned to Grant. Your surgery. The anonymous donor, that was me. Your car transmission, me. The reason you have never gone hungry, the reason you still have a roof over your head, is not because the universe loves you. It is because I worked 18-hour days for 16 years and sent the money home through shell companies so you would not have to swallow your pride. Grant stared at me. His mouth fell open. You, he whispered. But Mom said you were struggling. She said you could barely make rent. I let her believe that, I said, because I knew if she knew the truth, she would not respect the work. She would just expect the check, and she would have handed you my hard-earned money to throw away on schemes. I looked back at Darlene. She was pale, her eyes wide with shock. She was realizing that the daughter she had mocked, the daughter she had called useless, had been the invisible pillar holding up her entire life. You bragged about the money I gave you, I said to Darlene, and that bragging attracted the sharks. You used my protection to invite the predators in. Darlene lowered her head. She could not look at me. The shame was absolute. It stops today, I said. My voice was firm. I am done being the secret safety net. I am done being the ghost. From now on, if you want my help, you acknowledge where it comes from. We are going to have transparency. No more lies. No more pretending Grant is the golden child while I am the black sheep. If you want family, you give respect. If you cannot do that, then you are on your own. The room was silent. Every guest was listening. They were witnessing the dismantling of a decades-old family dynamic. Grant stepped forward. He looked at the floor, then at the screen where the evidence of his near ruin was still displayed, and finally at me. He looked different. The boyish arrogance was gone. He looked humbled. He looked like a man who had finally grown up. Addie, he said. His voice cracked. I treated you like garbage tonight. I let them treat you like garbage. Madison told me to cut you off, and I almost did it. He took a deep breath. Tears were streaming down his face, unhidden. I am so sorry, he said. I have been so blind. You were standing there, holding up the sky for us, and I was throwing rocks at you. I let you stand alone for too long. He reached out, hesitant, as if afraid I would push him away. I did not push him away. I did not hug him, either, not yet. Hugs were easy. Trust was hard. You were drowning. Grant, I said softly. I just pulled you out of the water. What you do on dry land is up to you. Grant nodded, accepting the boundary. I will do better, I promise. I looked around the room. The guests were watching me with a new expression. Gone were the sneers. Gone were the pitying glances at my shoes. In their place was something else. Respect, awe, and a little bit of fear. They finally understood. I was not the extra in this movie. I was the one who had built the set, paid for the lights, and directed the ending. "The party is over," I announced to the room. "Please exit through the main lobby. The valets have been instructed to retrieve your vehicles." I did not wait for applause. I did not wait for goodbyes. I turned and walked toward the double doors at the back of the ballroom. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. As I walked, I could hear the whispers starting, but they did not matter anymore. "That is the owner," someone whispered. "She saved him," another voice said. I would not want to cross her. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool night air of the lobby. The humidity of South Carolina hit me, but it felt different now. It felt like cleansing rain. I looked down at the silver hummingbird on my chest. It caught the light of the hotel entrance. I had spent my whole life waiting for permission to be great. I had waited for my mother to praise me. I had waited for my brother to defend me. I had waited for the world to notice me. Tonight, I stopped waiting. I touched the brooch one last time. "We are flying now, Nana," I whispered. I walked out the door, my heels clicking on the pavement, walking away from the wreckage of the wedding and into a future that was entirely, undeniably mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country, so we can see how far this story has traveled. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help share this story with more people. See you in the next one.